welcome to a new Getting to Know Japan webinar. Thank you for joining us, and a big thank you to our sponsor, the Japan Foundation New York, for funding this series and enabling us to put this on each week. Today, we are joined by Hiroko Yoda and Matt Alt, who will be presenting on the Meet the Yokai, Monsters from Japanese Folklore. Hiroko Yoda was born and raised in Tokyo and educated in the United States at the University of Maryland and American University. She is the co-founder of the video game localization company, AltJapan Company Limited, and an author of many books and articles about Japan. She co-authored Yokai Attack, the Japanese Monster Survival Guide, and Japanimonium Illustrated, the Yokai Encyclopedias of Toriyama Seikien. Her articles appeared on the CNN website, Vice, and the New Yorker. She is hard at work on a new book in Japanese spiritual traditions. Matt Alt is the co-founder of the video game localization company, AltJapan. Born in Washington, D.C. and raised in its suburbs, he graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He has lived in Tokyo since 2003, and his wife and partner Hiroko Yoda. He is a former co-host of the NHK World show Japanology Plus, a frequent writer for the New Yorker, and the author for the book Pure Invention, How Japan Made the Modern World. So Hiroko and Matt, it is nice to have you with us here today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your morning to be with us. I'll let you take it from here.
Hi. We don't actually look like this. Sorry, these are just our yokai masks. Thank you so much for having us on a great, beautiful Halloween morning.
And happy Halloween.
And happy Halloween. We are going to start a little PowerPoint performance now. Let me share our screen. So get ready for a little bit of excitement here. There we go. So as I said, thanks for having us. I'm Matt Alt.
I'm Hiroko Yoda.
And we are the authors of many books on Japanese yokai culture. We're going to get into that in a second. But the number one thing that I want to state for the record here up front is that Halloween is actually not the season for spookiness in Japan. It's a different season. And as to why that is, I'm going to hand the mic over to Hiroko.
In the West, the spooky season is autumn. But in Japan, the season for ghosts is summer. The reason for this is a traditional holiday called Obon. It takes place in mid-August and lasts for a week. It's a time when people traditionally return to their hometowns for family gatherings, both the living and the spirits of your family members too. It's time of remembrance and gratitude for your roots, and people gather to clean their family grave plots and offer flowers and incense. And there are many other traditions too. For instance, preparing cucumbers and eggplants for your ancestors to ride. The cucumber is a horse, so the spirits can arrive quickly. And the eggplant, an ox, so they can go back slowly. And then there are neighborhood Bon-Odori festivals where everyone parties and dances. Today, Bon-Odori are more like summer block parties. But this is where that tradition started. But at the same time, the lid of the underworld loosens too. All sorts of creatures and ghouls can get out of for a while too. So there's also a long tradition of scary entertainment in the summer months. There was a parlor game where the people gathered and told ghost stories over the course of the night, blowing out candle after each one. When the last story was told and the lights dimmed, something creepy might appear. So they said. And there's a huge amount of spooky traditional art set around this time, such as ink paintings of ghosts and wood footprints. That's the cultural background to what we are going to talk about today, which is yokai. For the next half an hour, we're going to go over what yokai is, where they came from, what they represent, some specific yokai and sightings. Yokai are mythical, supernatural creatures that have populated generations of folktales in Japan. Yokai are the things that go bump in the night. They're essentially superstitions and personalities. They are the faces behind the strange phenomena we cannot explain.
So Hiroko's always been interested in yokai, having grown up here in Japan. She kind of brainwashed me into loving them as well. But our real jump into studying yokai culture came with a question that occurred to us about 15 years back. And that is, why is Japan so good at creating characters? Today, Japan's entertainment products in the form of comics, cartoons, video games, mascots, they're a massive industry, and they're filled with all sorts of characters. And so many of them take the form of monsters. The Pokemon are one of the more obvious examples of this. But who can forget giant monsters like Godzilla and all of the other kaiju monsters he fought? Or the creepy creatures the Power Rangers fight in every episode. It seems like so much of what people love about Japanese entertainment hinges on monsters. By the way, just to be clear, none of these are considered yokai in Japan. Pokemon are Pokemon, giant monsters are called kaiju, which means mysterious beasts, and more human-sized monsters are kaijin, weird beings. But you can also find this sort of character culture on the streets of Japan. There are anthropomorphic mascots everywhere if you look for them. It seems if you just put eyes and a mouth on something, it's a character here. A police station at far right. In the middle, a sign explaining how trees act as a windbreak to protect a subdivision of homes from the ocean breezes. And at far left, a tsunami preparation drill mascot, an anthropomorphic wave. Where does this penchant for creating anthropomorphic characters come from?
In times of old, Japanese thought everything around them had a spirit. The sun above, the earth below, the water, everything. The idea anything can have a spirit is called animism. In Shinto, the native religion of Japan, it's said that there are 8 million kami, which is what we call gods. The top image shows Amaterasu, the sun goddess coming out to the elder kami. You can already see in this fundamental Shinto story how she is a personification of the sun. The kami range from powerful gods on high all the way down to unwelcome things like a kami of poverty or even kami of plagues. Again, personifications. Kami symbolizes existence itself, including all of its good and bad aspects. Animism and polytheism are very old, but they still quietly inform the worldview of modern Japanese. The yokai are one of the most fun examples of this. I want to be very clear that yokai are definitely not Shinto. They are secular, but they share aspects and come from the same spiritual worldview background. These are some illustrations we commissioned for our book, Yokai Attack. Yokai take all sorts of different forms. Some are human-like creatures. Others are animals who trick us. Some are everyday objects. Others are natural phenomena. And still others are personifications of puns and wordplay. We'll talk about some of these later, but here's one quick example. Top left is a yokai called the red bean washer. It makes a sound like beans being washed in colander. It's the face of a strange phenomenon. In the mountains, the sound of water can seem to come from different directions than the river. When the people experienced this long ago, someone named it the red bean washer, and it became a yokai. Cultures all over the world have invoked the supernatural to explain various unexplainable phenomena. That isn't unique to Japan. What is unique is how Japanese made characters out of them. And there are many different yokai. And this is just a sample. Some yokai are tricksters, but they are not by nature bad or evil. They just are. This is the big difference between yokai and monsters of Western lore. In the West, monsters are antagonists. In Japan, yokai are more like explanations, personifications of them.
So let's go back in time, quite a few years, a millennium or more, to Konjaku Monogatari, or what's known in English as Tales of Long Ago. This is one of Japan's oldest known manuscripts. It collects stories that were already quite old, even when this was written over 1,000 years ago. Its pages contain some of the first literary descriptions of creatures we now call yokai. Back then, they had a different name. They were called oni, and the descriptions were very vague, nothing like the characters we know today. All of that came much later. One key passage of the Konjaku Monogatari describes a beastly parade that manifests along Ichijo-dori Street, which was then the furthest edge of the city of Heian-kyo, known as Kyoto today. That street is now in the middle of Kyoto, but back then, 1,000 years ago, it was on the edge, and it separated civilized Kyoto from the barbarian-like hordes that lived outside, or at least that's how the Kyotoites, the uber-cultured Kyotoites, saw it. Anyway, on days when this monstrous parade appeared and marched along the street, residents took refuge in their homes because they would be sickened or even die from fright if they would see the parade marching down. This idea seized hold over the Japanese imagination, but it remained just that, imagination, for many, many centuries. Those freaky parades were known by an idiom in Japanese called hyakkiyagyo, which translates literally into countless oni night procession, or more colloquially, the demon's night parade. In the 16th century, so keep in mind this is almost half a millennium after those books came out, an artist named Tosa Mitsunobu painted his impression of a hyakkiyagyo parade, the first time one had ever been committed to paper. It was amazing, and it inspired a lot of other artists to make their own versions over the years. Tosa painted his on a scroll, and scrolls are a great way to portray parading monsters because you have to unroll the scroll to reveal the progress, which makes them kind of a form of early interactive entertainment. Interestingly, in Tosa's portrayal, many of the yokai took the form of man-made objects that had taken on this sort of uncanny, haunted, spooky form. You can see a haunted lute and a haunted koto floor harp that are leading this particular gang. Those objects established an entire new genre of yokai called tsukumogami, or artifact spirits. And that established the concept that anything could be a yokai, anything at all. And that really expanded the potentials for yokai culture considerably in the years to come. As cool as this art was and is, remember that this was an era before museums. Painted scrolls like this were precious, expensive, not available for viewing by average folk. By the way, this particular scroll is actually on display in Ueno, the Tokyo National Museum right now. For another month, you can see it as part of the Yamato-e art exhibition there. I really highly recommend checking it out if you can. So this was, you could do that now. You couldn't do it back in time 500 years ago because art was only for very wealthy people. But a few centuries later, a man would appear who would finally bring yokai art to the masses.
This is Toriyama Sekien. He was a very talented artist. He took the idea of hyakkiyagyo parades of yokai and turned it into a series of books, the first guidebooks to yokai folklore. They became bestsellers and are still the standard reference for yokai today. He published the first in 1776, Kazu Hyakkiyagyo, or Hyakkiyagyo Illustrated. Sekien's book debuted at an interesting time in Japanese history. Peace had come to the nation, and people were looking for new ways to entertain themselves. Printed books became very popular. At the time, there was a big market for encyclopedias. Sekien's book was a parody of them. He took the encyclopedia format, which was intended for useful wisdom and knowledge. Instead, he filled it with wild creatures from folklore. His book became bestseller. After a long search, we found clean copies of his book in archive of the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. This started us on a mission to translate it and its sequels into English for the first time, which we did it in 2016, Japanology Illustrated.
So this is an actual table of contents from one of Sekien's books. Sorry about the wormholes. It's 240 years old. But you can see here how he applied encyclopedia-style organization to the yokai. He collected examples from all over Japan and China, and he put them all together in an easily accessible, mass-produced format that anyone could consult. He started it out as a parody, but it turned into a powerful reference. This had the totally unintended effect of codifying or locking in the portrayals of yokai that had been, until that time, mainly local oral traditions. This is a spider woman here, the spider bride on the left. You can see it's a woman there with spider-like arms and spiders around. She's a classic from folklore. Here's a few more examples from Sekien's work. At left is a haunted skeleton emerging from a traditional Japanese coffin. But at right is one of my favorites. It's called buru buru, which means shivers. It's onomatopoeia for the act of shaking or shivering. But Sekien has turned that into an anthropomorphic yokai here. The text explains that whenever you get a shiver down your spine, it isn't your autonomous human instinct. It's actually caused by this yokai, who makes you shiver when it grabs hold of your collar. This kind of playfulness is another thing that really separates Japanese yokai from foreign monsters in our mind. By the late Edo period, which is to say the Edo period ran from about 1600 to 1868. So by the late Edo period in the early 1800s, there was a thriving marketplace for mass-produced entertainment in Japan's big cities. And a lot of it featured yokai. Writers produced yokai books filled with spooky stories. Talented artists produced yokai art like woodblock prints. I'm sure you've all seen this one down at bottom left. It's one of Japan's most famous. Tailors made yokai fashions. And there were even yokai games, like these karuta cards, which feature yokai motifs. These are the literal direct ancestors of Pokemon cards. Today, Japanese characters are some of the nation's biggest exports. That all started with yokai, some of the first characters that Japan ever commercialized hundreds of years ago. This makes yokai the root of modern-day Japanese pop culture and merchandising that we see today.
Next, I'd like to talk about some famous yokai. The kappa is the superstar of the yokai world. I would bet that there are very few Japanese who have never heard of one or are not familiar with their basic characteristics. In folklore, kappa take many forms, but the most basic one is this. They are humanoid creatures that live in the water. They have slimy, frog-like skin, tortoise-like shells on their backs. Yes, on the back. Beak-like mouth, and perhaps most importantly, they have dish-like depressions on their heads that hold in a little water, even if they're on land. If the water spills, they lose their power. The association with water remains today. We call raincoats kappa in Japanese. Their favorite trick is to pull a swimmer underwater and remove their shirikodama, a mysterious organ said to reside in the human colon, by hand. There are so many examples of kappa in traditional stories and art. At left is from an 18th century fort of kappa sighting. At right is a netsuke, an ornament for kimono shaped like a kappa wrestling a toad. Kappa are famed for loving to wrestle.
Kappa are also great because they're an example of how yokai culture isn't just ancient history. They're very alive and well in modern Japanese culture. You might be familiar with this sushi. It's called the kappa maki. It's a cucumber roll. The reason why the cucumber roll is called the kappa maki is because cucumbers in folklore are said to be one of the kappa's most favorite treats. So every time you sit down to eat this sushi roll, you are indirectly partaking in Japanese yokai history. Here's another great example. This is an idiom from modern Japanese. He no kappa, a kappa's fart. Kappa are notorious for their flatulence in Japanese folklore, and this idiom is still used today. It means something that's easy or a piece of cake. It's a little old-fashioned, but if you use it, people will definitely understand what you're saying. He no kappa. And finally, this is another great example of how kappa can be seen in everyday life. That association with kappa and water that Hiroko mentioned means that they are traditional boogeymen who parents invoked to scare their children away from dangerous bodies of water in times of old. This remains today. The kappa are used as a character on warning signs to warn kids away from places they shouldn't be playing, like this reservoir, for instance, we found out in the countryside in Izumo.
I'd like to tell you a scary story from Japan. It's about Kuchisake Onna, the slush-mouth woman. She looks like a normal woman wearing a mask. She appears in the afternoon when children are on their way home from school. She approaches you and she asks, "Watashi kirei?" which means, "Am I pretty?" If you answer yes, she removes her mask. It's slashed open. Oh, her ears. She crouches close to your face and asks again, "Even like this?" This time, she doesn't care what you say. She takes out a knife and cuts your mouth just like her. If you answer no, she slashes your mouth anyway. You're damned if you do, damned if you don't. The slush-mouth woman can run really fast, 100 meters in 3 seconds. So running won't help. The slush-mouth woman is one of the newest yokai. She first appeared in 1978, and the stories about her terrorized school kids throughout Japan, including me. In closing, I want to talk about the current it girl of the yokai world, which is called Amabie. It was first reported in an 1846 newspaper article. This is it. It supposedly appeared over the ocean near Kyushu, where a police officer reported seeing it. This is an actual reproduction. It featured this cute drawing, plus the officer's report. Amabie rose from the waves and said, "This year will be an abundant harvest. And if plague comes, then draw me and show me to the people." Then he sank beneath the waves, never to be seen again.
Or maybe not. 174 years later, in 2020, something very strange happened. Now, remember, this was the middle of the global pandemic when everyone was stuck indoors. Someone rediscovered the story of Amabie and followed its directions to the letter, drawing and sharing a portrayal. But this being the modern era, they quote unquote showed it to the people by posting their drawing on Twitter. It went viral. Soon, people all over Japan were drawing and sharing their own versions of Amabie. Then, people around the world followed. From that drawing in 1864, 1846, Amabie went all over the planet. When you think about it, the story is really designed to go viral. These are just some examples I found online. There are way, way too many to count. So Amabie rose from obscurity to become the most famous yokai in all of Japan for a while. She became so famous, in fact, that even the Japanese government started using her as a mascot. The Ministry of Health in 2021 and 2022 used Amabie on its posters for its prevention campaign to stop the spread of the COVID-19 virus. So Amabie is a great example of what Hiroko and I believe. Yokai never die. They just kind of bide their time, waiting to come back until the moment suits them. Amabie is the poster yokai for that. Now, another final really quick example of yokai in real life. This is the Seshoseki, the life-taking stone. This is an annotated page from our book, Japandemonium Illustrated, with the translation of Sekien's text on top and the analysis at bottom. Now, in Japan, foxes are shapeshifters. They're tricksters. And the older they get, the more tails they grow and the more powerful they become. This drawing shows the end of a very famous story in Japanese folklore, where a nine-tailed fox tried to seduce the emperor. She was found out, chased out, and killed. Her body turned into a boulder, one said to kill anything that came near it. In Sekien's drawing here, the rock is shaped like a fox, and you can see the tails at the bottom right. The interesting thing is this rock really exists. It's in a volcanic field in Tochigi Prefecture, a little north of Tokyo. There are holes, fumaroles, around the rock that occasionally release toxic gases, and it really can be dangerous to get too close. But this life-taking stone took on it became an international sensation in 2022 when it suddenly split in two. The New York Times even covered it. I really did a double take when I saw this headline, and so did Hiroko. But it just goes to show you, yokai are always around, and they pop up in some really, really surprising places. Really, just keep your eyes open. The parallels between ancient Japanese history and modern Japanese pop culture are really obvious when you start looking for them. Like the Pokemon, for instance. Look at them parading here. This seems familiar, doesn't it? At any rate, that ends it for today. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much.
I'm Matt Alt.
Hiroko Yoda.
These are our books. Please check them out if you get a chance. Now I guess we'll take some questions. I'm gonna stop sharing our screen here and go back to us. Bye.
Thank you so much, Matt and Hiroko, for that wonderful presentation. Really, really interesting. I think for maybe people who are not familiar with the yokai, I think some of the images that you have shown are like, have really kind of reinforced the fact that like yokai are so immersed in Japanese culture. Mm-hmm. They can be seen whether or not you know it's a yokai or not. I'm pretty sure almost everyone that's watching this presentation has seen it in some form or fashion. Yeah. So it's really interesting. So to begin with the questions, I have a question. So Hiroko mentioned that the yokai are not to be feared. They just are, what they are. So like besides like the cute monsters that are Pokemon, are the yokai supposed to be monsters that people are supposed to coexist with? As you know, Western monsters, people fear them, they want to avoid them. Mm-hmm. So are Japanese folklore monsters supposed to, are we supposed to coexist with them?
Yes. First, I'd like to clarify that the Pokemon are not yokai. They are clear there. And it's a copyrighted things and blah, blah, blah. So, but still, that you actually pointed out a very interesting point that's the exact reasons and why we chose the word yokai, not monsters. Because if you call it monsters, then negative meaning started coming to play because monsters, it's English. It's if it
has baggage.
Yeah. So yokai. Yokai are basically the characters from Japanese folklore, and then those are, like I said in the presentation, the explanation. It's a personification of natural phenomena, unexplainable things. Because if you want to try to explain something you can't understand or something it just could not be in words, then people creating one word, name it, and then so that they can communicate. And that's what basically yokai is. And so I know if I explain it to the kids, I feel kind of bad because, and then, oh, I'm sorry, honey, the yokai doesn't exist. You can't find, you cannot actually find it. That's just so boring.
Yeah.
But in a Japanese cultural historical definitions, monster the yokai are basically explanations of something. And then also, I'm sorry, I'm talking too long, but also at the it plays as a mediator. It's actually a positive thing that like we brought it in the Amabiye. I mean, that character looks just so silly. I mean, not strong. But the government even used it, and the people loved it just because the COVID-19 era is really difficult, and then we know we have to deal with it. So it just yokai just comes in with the silly faces, and then it just provides us to play with. That kind of playfulness is a major character of yokai, and that monster, that boogeyman, like a Friday the 13th type of thing, and you do something wrong and kill you. That's not how plays in yokai.
I see. That's very interesting. When you show that photo of like the various yokai, different personifications, it made me think of like maybe yokai are somewhat something in our subconscious that we see or we know that has kind of taken on this like monster characteristic or what.
Yes. Well, they're the faces for things that freak us out. Like there's a great one that I really love called the yanari, which means house creaker. And it's basically, in Japan, just like in the West, late at night, you're laying in bed and you hear some weird creaking or like footsteps in your house. And you're like, oh my God, what is that? You know what I mean? And we, sometimes in the West, we say it's ghosts or, poltergeists or whatever. In Japan, there's actual yokai, and there's a great drawing of these little like elf things pounding on the corners of your house, making those sounds in the night when you're there. And so, when you hear that sound, you can be like, oh, it's just the house creakers again, and you can kind of get past it a little bit, I guess. So I just love that the way that they anthropomorphize and personify the same things that scare us, and it's a cultural way of looking at the world that's a little different.
Thank you so much. Madeline McGraw asked, are yokai considered malevolent creatures all the time? Are kitsune considered yokai?
Well, it depends on the era and the story. So certainly foxes were seen as malevolent, like that story I touched on at the very end where the nine-tailed fox tricked the emperor and was trying to kind of take over all of Japan. It's a very old story, but the yokai are basically shapeshifters and tricksters, and the foxes are often kind of portrayed together with tanuki, which are another form of Japanese, like a small mammal. Actually, you can see a little statue of one behind us right here. I'm not pointing at Hiroko, she's not a tanuki.
We never know.
But tanuki tend to be more silly shapeshifters. Like they're the kind of people who would trick you into walking into like a septic tank or something like that. Whereas foxes might trick you into walking off a cliff. They're like a little bit more of a dangerous sort of shapeshifter. And there's a lot of stories in Japanese folklore of foxes shapeshifting into beautiful women and tricking men, or making kind of lights in the forest at night that lead people off and they walk into like quicksand and drown or something like that. So they are malevolent, but they're also kind of a personification of just the strange things that can happen to you when you're out in the wilderness, or how you can get tricked as a person. So, but malevolent's a tough word. They're not like inherently evil, like we think of like in biblical tradition, like a demon is like or a satanic thing is a personification of evil. And yokai aren't like that, which is why we don't like the word demon for them.
Yeah. Another thing, that interesting about the yokai is that the roots are multiple. I mean, huge. Even though today we see the kappa, the dish and the turtle, just like shells on the back and blah blah blah. But there's no actually right answer for the kappa, because its difference is that differ in regions, time, people, whatever.
Context.
Context too. So the fox are the same, it's the exact same thing. It's just, even though we talk about a fox, but it's not the fox. This is the definition. This is the what it looks like. It's not like that. It just over the course of time, it absorbed a lot of the things, even coming from foreign countries. And then the stuff that he just mentioned was from the foreign country. It just came through China and Japan and emerged. So that's the fun part as an adult that I called it. Even actually in our book in Japan Demonium Illustrated, I mentioned that yokai is actually a code. And every bit of part or explanations or whatever, it's just coming from the different background. It's not just Japan; it's just foreign countries.
Could China, could be India,
or and also of course, some maybe the second interpretations. Who knows? But it just so that's the beauty of it. And then you just cannot just stick to the one word malevolent, and then it's just like, oh, this is the the fox. It's just so maybe malevolent.
Yeah, maybe.
That's the thing. It's just maybe. And then I know it sounds so loose, but that's once again, that's the beauty of the yokai.
That vagueness of yokai is what is often really difficult for Westerners. They're very ambiguous. In the West, a demon is like bad, like a leprechaun is scary, like these sorts of things, a ghost is scary. These sorts of things are very defined. In Japan, what a yokai is, even when you drill down to a single yokai, it's quite amorphous. But they're shapeshifters. This is what they do.
Yeah.
So it's
even if it's like malevolent. And in Japanese goes like, okay, then
like why? What?
And then then what? What kind of thing. It just keeps evolving, and it's once again, it's a playfulness. Yeah. It's just the yokai concept welcomes everyone, not just the Japanese. That come be it, all over the world, adults, kids, whatever. They carved the woods. Crazy stuff. And then none of the stuff is the same. But it's okay because they called it Amabiye, and then okay, that's who they are. Even though they look like what?
The Starbucks mascot?
Yeah.
She kind of does look like the Starbucks mascot, doesn't she? I don't know.
So it's fun stuff. It's fun stuff.
Thank you so much. Cheyenne Hill asks, so if a lot of things are personified, would you say that at least some yokai were characters personified from feelings of fear someone might have felt, for example, while walking at home at night or in the bath?
Yes. But you can create it too, when you walk in the dark at night and then alone, and then you heard something, and then it pop in my head, just you can create something.
Give it a name.
And there you go. That's yokai. And then you say it's like, I don't know, you name it, call it Dogger or something like that. It's just Dogger, and Mrs. Dogger, and then that's started walking, by itself. And who knows, in the next 100 years, people, it's just that's how it is.
Do you know what a great example of this is, though? This is reminding me. So have you ever had that feeling where you felt like something brushed against you and it maybe even gave you a shiver, but then there's nothing there, and modern day, we're like, oh yeah, the nervous system, you had a little nervous twitch or something like that. But there's actually a yokai for that. It's called Sune Kosuri, which means the calf, what's the calf rubber. Yeah. So it's the feeling that something has rubbed against you, and there's actually a drawing of it. It turned into a yokai. This, because Japanese, it happens in Japan, it happens everywhere. There's humans everywhere, but Japanese turned it into a character. So this is exactly right. The things that scare us, all of us, this is one of the reasons yokai culture is so fun, is because once you explain what it is, you're like, oh wow, they have a character for that over there. In Japan. And so there's so many like that. I see also in the questions, a lot of questions about baths. And there was a great yokai called Akaname, which is this red creature that haunts dirty bathtubs. And it sounds kind of weird from a modern perspective, but
don't apply it in Western style of bathroom.
But back in time, Japanese baths and toilets were separated, and they were often in a different building, kind of an outbuilding, and there was no lights, and especially in the summer it was very muggy and damp, and you'd open the door and a toad would come jumping out, or you know what I mean, maybe there's a worm on the floor, because it's you're in the natural world. It's now modern life, we're very able to draw lines between ourselves and the outside world. but that wasn't as easy back in time. And so like that bathtub yokai, now it's kind of funny to think if you don't clean your bathtub, this yokai is going to show up and kind of haunt your greasy, dirty tub. You know, it sounds like almost like kind of a moralistic thing.
Story for you.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, well, you know, if you have that yokai in your house, just clean your bathtub. Just like you don't need to hire the exorcist.
Don't rely on
them. Just clean your bathtub. But
they're not going to clean up for you. Just they're there.
Yeah. But so there's examples of stuff like that in the Japanese lore.
Thank you so much. So Jeff asked, I'm curious about if Japan was modernizing, if more and more new yokai began to develop in popular culture to personify some of the changes that were happening in society. Was that the case, or has it generally been just the traditional yokai?
Well, they crushed them out for a while. Like in the immediate, like, so the yokai's like heyday was the Edo period, which is the late Edo period in particular, which is like the like 1800s to about 1868. 1868 is when the American Navy sailed into the Uraga Harbor with guns ablazing and said, "Open your ports," and very classic gunboat diplomacy, and reopened Japan and started, and that led to what's called the Meiji Restoration. And this is a big turning point in Japanese history where they're like, Japan had been living in isolation for 200 years. And now all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, like there's this whole world out there and they have big guns and big ships that can travel across the ocean really quick and trains. And like, oh my God, we had better catch up. And so there was a period there in the late 19th century where people did everything, the authorities did everything they could to kind of stamp out what they called superstitions.
Yeah.
And so that was a kind of dark period.
Yeah, but also that's part of it too. But also I think it's once again I said that the yokai's role is explain unexplainable things. That means, you know, the huge example is disease. That's invisible. And then the medication, the medical level is just so low. I mean, when it was the Western concept that came to Japan, and then all the medical stuff, and it started changing too. But until that point, that the people in the past and explained called bug.
Yeah,
it's all bug. Mushi. It's all bug. You know, the cavity is mushiba. Is like the bugs.
And we should be clear, these aren't bugs like six-legged bugs that walk on the ground. They're kind of like bugs.
It's a concept. And so, you know, if you bug in a computer.
Yeah.
You don't think that's a bug in a computer. No. It's a bug.
Yeah, it's that kind of thing. A bug is a yokai. A computer bug is kind of a yokai. What causes it? You know, like where does it come from?
So basically all the technology started. I don't want to call it killing, but it just, I guess, what to call it, debunked.
Yeah, no, I mean, or replacing, since so many yokai are explanations of strange phenomena, as science started to come to the forefront and Japanese could explain more things, obviously you don't need to use a yokai to explain something that there's a logical explanation for. They're by definition illogical. So, but what ended up happening was there was a kind of boomerang effect. In the early 20th century, a lot of Japanese started to feel like, you know what, in this rush toward modernization, we started to lose a lot of what made us Japanese as a culture and a people. And that started this whole trend toward reevaluating Japanese folklore as something kind of uniquely Japanese heritage. And you started to see scholars kind of cataloging Japanese folklore and more yokai coming up in things like comic books and stories and stuff. Actually, the word yokai is a really recent vintage. It's only dates back to, I mean, it's been a word in Japanese for a really long time, but it only came to be used for the characters, for the creatures, that we use it in the form today in like really the early 20th century.
Yeah, so what we are kind of familiar with today is very modern, that cute, playful, you know, the mascots, that kind of thing. It's the, you know, that really cute entertainment stuff. It's a very modern thing. Until the modernization comes into play, you know, when after America came in, blah blah blah. It's you know that against the civilization made yokai make it cute, but before that, you know, once again, the disease is a serious deal, and all kind of stuff. It's just there's no electricity.
Yeah.
And the sun goes down. It's black. Yeah. It's black. I mean, so there's a lot of stuff that people can explain. I'm not talking about people in the past are silly or uneducated. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about, it's a totally different environment. And then yokai, they more call it kind of shapeshifters. What bakemono is it?
Yeah, bakemono is literally a shapeshifter.
Yeah, shapeshifter.
A transformed thing, things that transform.
Yeah, and so it's more and people disappear without any, and probably
they're back in time,
but they call it spirited away, and then in order to understand, people need something to settle, comes to peace with it, and then it's like, it's just, so it's like, okay, your loved one, the child just missing, gone, and then that's just basically last choice. It's like, it's a spirited away by Tengu or whatever, and then it's just trying to come down with something, and then so it's different deal back then.
Yeah, you have to look at it in there.
Yeah, and it's so many layers. But today, it's a absolutely playful.
This actually brings, I see a question in here that's really interesting from Vivian. What's the difference between yokai, kami, oni, and yurei? And that's, first of all, yurei is the Japanese word for ghost. Yokai is for yokai. What is the difference between, why don't you start with that?
So yokai are something, and yurei, ghosts, are someone. And the oni, what was it? Oni is I would call it category. Oni is a category. Okay. I think I bet you anything the Vivian thinks that oni is the red face, horn, that's classic. But that's just one example, and absolutely that's the right thing. But only if you if you dig into the historical thing, the histories, cultures, traditions, back in things, and then the meaning is totally changed. What they look could change.
What they're called.
I mean, what basically oni is one of the old thing. I mean, we're talking about like 900 years, 1,000 back, and then it only are basically at the time period. It's a serious deal. It is something that, I mean, I don't know. I don't want to call it malevolent, but it can be hurt you.
Oni, or
that kind.
Well, remember the 1,000 years ago, the parade, the onis, the countless oni parading. People would literally hide in their house when they thought this thing was coming by.
Probably they take them like they kill you, like that knife away kind of thing. Or at a certain time, the oni is actually portrayed as enemy of Buddhism. And tricking the monks and stuff, and so it's all kinds of things. So that's oni. Kami are Japanese spirituality,
deities,
and deities, yes. But it's a totally different thing. And then if I started over kami, it's going to be another presentation.
But the borders between, because you're talking such a huge swath of history, like 1,000 years or whatever or more. The borders between these things are really amorphous, depending on what time period, what place, what region, even what person is talking about them. So, like, for instance, we in our books draw a strict line between yokai as a something and yurei as a someone. And there's a sequel to Yokai Attack called Yurei Attack that's all full of ghosts. But in actual, like, spoken colloquial Japanese, I don't think most people make a huge distinction between yokai and yurei and oni. They're all kind of seen as one sort of thing. It's like, when you say, oh, it's a bug, but you might be talking about it. Are you talking about an insect? Are you talking about a spider? Are you talking about a worm? Like the way we use bug in English and the way Japanese use mushi is kind of similar to that. Kami are worshipped, generally speaking. I mean, they're like, or venerated, I think, would be maybe.
But see, I'm folklorist. So the definition is always, important thing. And then the kami is worship. That's just it's part of it. But but I said in the presentations that there's actually kami or plague. We're not worshiping it, or the pretty. You're not worshiping it.
Worships the god of poverty.
It's because once again, it's a personification, also characterization of something. It's basically that, that because people thought in the past everything has a spirit in everything. I mean everything. Even the depth of the water, the surface water and the mid, and then underneath of the very the depth of the water, that kind of stuff, or rock, door, house, everything. So, what they're teaching us or telling us is that existence, and that's what kami is. That's why I stick to my definition that no matter how much you hate, how much you want to get away from the plague or being past poor, whatever, but it just exists. Yeah. So you have to deal with it. Yeah. And then that's where the deity comes into play. And then for the disease, the plague, it just back in time, especially people don't know what's going on. They're not touch or anything, but all of a sudden you get sick, and then all the family members all of a sudden passed away. It's a scary thing. Right. So they create a deity, and it started, like not worshiping it, but it's like easing the anger, easing something, and then that's the the spiritual that comes to play.
Well, so and those anthropomorphic characters, that we were talking about earlier, they play a really similar role in Japanese society. They're mediators in situations where you might be embarrassed or there's conflict or something. So, for instance, like it's when you go into a drugstore and like the constipation medicine has like a Mr. Poop, like with a face and like, hey, eat me if you're feeling kind of bad. People don't even. In a drugstore, people don't want to go up and be like, and so these characters show up and they help people kind of process and communicate in a sort of indirect way in a lot of cases. The yokai played that role in times of old. Anthropomorphic characters of all sorts play that role in modern times. And then there's like modern manifestations of yokai-like things, not just, resurrected, so to speak, yokai like Amabie. There's yokai-like thinking. You can see it in all sorts of places in modern Japanese society. One of the funny ways, America had cars, America had robots. Why was it that Japan came up with the idea of cars that turned into robots? They were like robots in disguise, right? The Transformers to me are a very yokai-like thing because they're hiding in plain sight as an everyday object. And then when necessity hits, they turn into a different form and they fight or they help us or do whatever. I think the reason that series was invented in Japan and not in America or Canada or France or anywhere else is because Japan had this long history of shape-shifting characters, and it just kind of popped into somebody's mind, oh, a car, a plane, a truck, or whatever. So, who knows? Maybe there are yokai hiding in plain sight around us, and we just don't even know it yet.
Thank you so much. So the next question, 2 questions, comes from Michael Sutton. Asks, how much of Seikien's book is his own inspiration and how much is it from others? Do we know? And also, where does the Tengu come from? Is it Japanese, Chinese, or Indian? In his or her, its origin story?
Well, Seikien's early books are all collections from different places, and he's pretty proactive about saying, well, this one comes from China, and he'll often be like, this comes from China's Mount Shengtang or something like that, or this comes from India, so there are 4 volumes that he published, 4 books. Each one of them is separated into 3 smaller ones. It's just how they did it back in time, but we consider each one of those groupings a single book. So 4 books came out. By the time the 4th book came out, he had kind of run out of local. I don't run out is probably not the word, but the last book is really filled with anthropomorphic objects and things that are more puns and stories. And he gave it a kind of his own storyline that in the beginning of the book, he falls asleep in this old building, this old house, and sees all of these things around him having parties and dancing. And he's kind of like doing the Edo equivalent of walking around with a tape recorder. He's got like his brush and paper and recording what he sees. So that last book is mainly his sort of view of the world.
Yeah, but
there's
be
many exceptions.
Be aware that when he finished it, he passed away.
Yeah.
So it's actually made me cry.
Yeah, sure.
So, but anyway, Sekian not only clearly wrote the word reference he referenced from, but the amazing thing that the Sekian did to the Japanemonium Illustrated was that he gave the yokai each character's background. Till then,
like a literal background, he drew them in a background.
Yeah, and then because till then the yokai are written in the scrolls, and then just a standalone thing. I mean, there's some the plant or something in the background or whatever, but still it's always the one
white background.
White background. It's just one character. But Sekian, because it's encyclopedia, but he's an artist, so he chose, for some reason, he chose one yokai. And then gives in the background, and then some housing or river or flowers, whatever. Anyway, so when we worked on the translating and then analyzing stuff, that I realized that every part, why he chose this plant in here, why he chose that
just in the sky,
and then
constellation,
every part has meaning. I realized that he never chose randomly to say, he just doesn't. And so
the point being is that Sekian, even when he's taking yokai that had some specific,
so it's
he gives his own.
So I call it yokai code, and then the book that we published, it's just only our interpretations, and then I reference also, I use imaginations, blah blah, but it's not right answer. There has to be more, and then I always say that and because of that, I call it Sekian code. I'm open ears.
Yeah, we want to hear read it, please. Read it and tell us what your interpretation.
But it's very. He did very interesting work, and I wish I could talk to him because I wanted to write an answer, but unfortunately he passed away 240 years ago.
Yes.
So, but it's a cool stuff.
Well, let's jump to the next
Tengu.
Tengu. So
what was the question?
Tengu, where do they come from? So like Tengu is written with the characters for heavenly dog. They don't look much like dogs, but they come from China originally, or at least that's where the word entered the Japanese lexicon. But Tengu have such a long history in Japan that this is another example of, well, what Tengu are you talking about and when? Like in their earliest incarnations in Japan, they're kind of birdmen. They have like raven-like beaks. And there's actually two main types of Tengu. The Karasu Tengu, which is like a raven man. You have like a bird head and wings, almost like an angel, but much more muscular. And then there's the long-nosed Tengu, which comes along much later in the folklore. And you see masks like this in all sorts of restaurants and things in Japan now. This is like a really famous type of thing. In the Edo period, when more stories started to be told about Tengu, they started to like put a hierarchy on them. Like these guys with the long noses are at the top, and like the guys with the beaks are their underlings. But this is all kind of like somebody came up with the story and added it. There's so many different stories about Tengu and so many different periods. Hiroko earlier was talking about Oni kind of tricking Buddhist monks out of their meditations and things. The raven.
I'm sorry,
Tengu,
I got confused. Sorry, so Tengu was the one.
Yeah,
Tengu was a trickster.
Tengu
of Buddhism.
At some points in history are
Oni
tricksters of Buddhists. At other times, the Tengu would train, like they'd spirit you away and train you in martial arts. And so there's very many different takes on Tengu. The word came from China, and the idea that this was some sort of spiritual, supernatural creature came from China, but the Japanese over the centuries changed and augmented and added to it. And if you showed this to a Chinese person today, I don't think they would think it's a Japanese Tengu. I don't think they would associate it with their own folklore.
Yeah, he said heavily dog, but it's not really dog.
Right.
If you look at the kanji, it's a fox, but we're not talking about fox either. It's a mythical thing.
Are you confused yet?
It's a mythical thing, and then that's that's a total academic level things, but that in China that I heard and I read some book somewhere that that it's actually a shooting star. It's shooting star.
Okay, inauspicious.
And it's a some kind of omen, and then so it's a lot of the meanings and fused. I don't think fused into one, but it got fused.
Yeah.
Yes, and also I have to say I got confused. I got mixed it up. That oni are oni. I mean, sometimes they did it as an enemy of the Buddhism, but actually the Ting one I got mixed up. But oni oni are actually a powerful one. Yeah, it's a powerful one. And then
oni are like power personified.
The Tengu is it's a different, I guess, category. It's but not
we're getting tight. So is there any other big questions that we wanted to ask or talk about? I'm trying to see if there's anything. Hey, by the way, Carol Dorman, thank you very much. You're absolutely right. Of course, 1853 is when Commodore Perry's ship sailed in and came back in 54. Quite a thrilling time in Japanese history. But yes, thank you. If you want to get in touch with us or anything, we have websites. AltJapan.com is one. I also run one at matalt.com. You can find me there. We are on Twitter. We are on Facebook. We are on Instagram. Look for our names in Yokai. Find stuff, feel free to reach out.
Maybe we can end with this final question from Lily Crinchfield. What are the both of you your favorite yokai?
My favorite yokai is a slash-mouthed woman. I mean, I was the main generation. I mean, when I was in winter school, and then we are just every day we talked about her, exchanging new information and how to survive. But I knew it's all fake. But so it's basically we playing in a comfortable zone in a half believe, half not to believe, because we don't believe it because it just it doesn't feel crazy. But we try to believe it because if we see that way, it's just fun. And if we practice how to to get away, maybe we should run it a zigzag, kind of stuff. And so my favorite yokai is
fun.
It's fun.
Like there are some terrifying yokai out there, look like but my favorite one is this guy, the tofu boy. And I absolutely love this kind of yokai because he's not even scary. It's just a kid with a block of tofu who sneaks up on you and is like, want some tofu? And there's all sorts of stories, like maybe that tofu is poison or whatever, but it's not dangerous. It's not scary. It's just kind of weird and silly. And that sort of stuff, or like, Buru Buru, who I talked about, like you get a shiver because this thing is like kind of like tickling you on the back of your neck. I love that kind of sense of play and fun. And there are plenty of terrifying yokai out there. We've even written them, like when we've been asked to write yokai into video game scripts or things like that, because, dark, something jumps out at you and it's got like a turtle face and like fingers, and claws. It's scary stuff. Yes. So that's the great thing about yokai. They're very flexible and, you can enjoy them any way you want. Right? Yes. Okay.
Thank you so much again, Hiroko and Matt, for your presentation today and taking time out of your day to be with us. As everyone said in the chat, this was a really fun way to spend our Halloween, even though we know yokai is not, this is not yokai season. But still, thank you so much for agreeing to speak with us. And thank you again to our program sponsor, the Japan Foundation New York. Lastly, I would like to present some upcoming events very quickly. Thank you everyone for the amazing questions. I'm so sorry we couldn't get to all of them today, but if you just bear with us for like a couple more minutes, we would like to get to some upcoming events. Thank you. So the next Community Conversations event is going to be this Saturday, November 4th. It's going to be on Mongolia and its constructive contributions to Northeast Asian security issues. So this is a very unique event. This is actually a hybrid event. So for all of you who wanted to be able to watch community conversation events, but maybe you don't live in the areas in which we have these events, now you can. So we kindly ask that you will, log in and on Zoom and join us for this event, both online and in person. It will begin at 13:15 for the presentation. So please join us if you have time. The next Getting to Know Japan webinar is going to be on the history of Asia Pacific, the Asia Pacific War, 1941 to 1945. It's going to be next Thursday, November 9th at 1900. Vice Admiral Yoji Koda will be the speaker for this event. So please join us next week on Thursday for this Getting to Know Japan webinar. The next Indo-Pacific Maritime Hour is going to be on Indo-Pacific Endeavor 2023, End of Mission Brief. So Air Commander Anthony McCormick is going to be the speaker for this event. This is also an online webinar next Monday, November 13th, or the following Monday, I'm sorry, November 13th at 1900. So please join us for this event as well. And finally, the next Getting to Know Japan webinar is going to be on Meiji History 101, Feudal Island Backwater to Regional Power in 45 Years. It's going to be on Tuesday, November 14th at 10 a.m. Mr. Lance Gatling will be the speaker for this event. So we hope you will join us for all events. All of them, including the Community Conversations event this week, are going to be available to be watched online. So please use the links in our chat to learn more information about the events and on our website. And we hope to see you this weekend and next week. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you so much again, Matt and Hiroko. Please support them and check out their books that we put in the chat. Thank you.